Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, the law and politics of same-sex marriage in Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. We'll talk with Michael Crawford of the Human Rights Campaign and Maryland State Senator Sharon Grosfeld. Poet Grant McLeman and photographer Martin Lueders take us on a metaphorical voyage. David Cohen offers a bill of particulars in his latest book, The Lies of George W. Bush. Lies? Really? We'll hear from the author. Poet Leah Harris hears noises of the coming days. Get out your duct tape. And in Ants, Brandon Johnson wonders whether anyone really sees him. Children's author-illustrator Edwin Fontanez chats with Naomi Ayala on Writer's Bloc. And join in a Christmas hymn, Russian style. Vocal group Svetlana makes their American debut on the Coffee House. Welcome to the Forum at the Coffee House. November 18th was a day of celebration. Gay activists cheered their landmark victory in the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, granting, for the first time in America, the right to same-sex marriage. And now Maryland, D.C., Virginia, and other states have to decide whether they will grant marriages performed in Massachusetts full faith and credit, as the U.S. Constitution provides. Gays were not the only ones cheering the Massachusetts High Court decision. Republican campaign strategists were high-fiving, betting that Massachusetts once again had handed them a hot-button social issue that would tear apart the Democratic base. Just what are the current laws in the region regarding gay marriage, and what lies ahead legislatively? And are GOP strategists right that gay marriage is the Willie Horton of 2004? To answer these questions, we're joined by Michael Crawford, Associate Field Director of the Human Rights Campaign. Welcome, Michael, to the Coffee House.
Thank you, Mark. Glad to be here.
We're also joined by Maryland Senator Sharon Grosfeld of Montgomery County, who serves on the Joint Committee on Children, Youth, and Families in Annapolis. Welcome back, Sharon.
Thank you.
Michael, let's start with you. What the Massachusetts Supreme Court did in saying there's no bar on gay marriage, that's different than what Vermont did with civil unions and California did with domestic partnerships, isn't it?
That is different, and what the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts said was that there was no valid reason for denying same-sex couples civil marriage licenses. So it was not about gay marriage. People talk about gay marriage as though it's some kind of construct or idea that's being built specifically for same-sex couples, where really it's just same-sex couples seeking the same rights and protections that heterosexual couples have through marriage. What happened in Vermont was the Supreme Court there stated that the legislature had to provide equal benefits to same-sex couples, which the legislature then enacted civil unions rather than providing civil marriage licenses to same-sex couples. And in California, they did it a little differently in that the legislature passed a domestic partner benefits that provides the majority of the state-level benefits of marriage to same-sex couples, but it's not equivalent to marriage. And I think the one important thing to point out is that neither domestic partnership nor civil union is the legal equivalent of marriage.
Let's talk about this area. Virginia has a law that expressly says that it will not recognize same-sex marriages. Maryland and D.C. don't have any laws on this subject at all. Montgomery County has a law that recognizes domestic partnerships, at least of county employees, for certain benefits. Tell me about what you think will be on the legislative plate in these jurisdictions in the coming year.
Sure. As you pointed out, Virginia has a defensive marriage law, which 37 states in the country have right now. There's also a federal defensive marriage law. And basically what those say is that marriage is between one man and one woman, and that marriage between same-sex couples is illegal. And currently there is not one in Maryland, although what we expect is that a defensive marriage bill will be introduced in the state legislature, and there may also be attempts to amend both the Maryland and Virginia state constitutions to prohibit marriage between same-sex couples. And what we're finding is that because some legislators are afraid that defensive marriage laws can be overturned as being unconstitutional, that they're actually trying to amend state-level constitutions themselves. Because when you think about it, the constitutions is the document through which all of our laws come from. So anything that is expressly in the Constitution, the legislature cannot go against. And also on the federal level, there's an attempt to amend the U.S. Constitution to define marriages between one man and woman and to deny the legal and economic benefits of marriage to same-sex couples.
Sharon, in my introduction, I said that Republican strategists were very excited about this, but maybe it's a little bit more complicated than that. For instance, President Bush has said that he will defend the sanctity of marriage, but he hasn't endorsed one of the proposed federal constitutional amendments, at least not at the time of this taping. And there are people in the Republican administration and around the neoconservative movement and libertarian movements who seem to be in support of same-sex marriage or civil unions, what have you. Is this a wedge issue for Republicans as well as Democrats, perhaps?
Yes, I think that this is an issue that crosses both lines, Democrat, Republican, independent, libertarian, actually. I think that this is something that strikes at the heart and soul of people's beliefs and what they consider as what is appropriate behavior. And so those types of considerations are not specific to just a particular political party. Democrats hold beliefs, Republicans hold beliefs, they all hold their respective beliefs. And the question is, how do we have a law that does not discriminate, recognizing that people can have whatever beliefs they want, but that's generally a religious belief when they're talking about the issue of gay marriage, and that has no place in civil law. And that is why our state, our country, but we're talking about Maryland here, should in fact recognize gay marriages and in fact have a statute that allows for gay marriages. Currently, our current statute says that marriage is only between a man and a woman. The question that has been raised is what happens if a couple was married from another state, comes to Maryland.
They got married in Massachusetts.
That's right.
Or Canada.
Does Maryland have to recognize that? And again, I mean, we've got the federal act that would say no, but you also have full faith and credit, which each state is supposed to give to the laws of states, other states. And so I think ultimately it will probably come down to the courts making a decision, because there is going to be so much controversy about this. But I think that it's time. In fact, this legislation for Maryland is not new. In 96 or 97, I actually put in legislation which would have changed the law in Maryland so that gays and lesbians would have been able to get married here in Maryland.
But there are laws to the contrary, too.
Yes.
There are laws expressly saying that such a marriage that from Massachusetts, for instance, would not be recognized in Maryland.
Right, and legislation was introduced to do not only that, but to even go further and be very, very oppressive and was quite mean-spirited. And the hearings...
And Governor Ehrlich was very quick out of the box in saying that it's never going to happen here, end of discussion. Well, the discussion obviously hasn't ended, but
Exactly.
Is he right that there's not going to be gay marriage in Maryland?
I actually think he's wrong. I think it's probably not going to happen next year, may not even the year after that, but eventually there will be civil marriage between same-sex couples in Maryland and throughout the country. And I think the issue, as the senator pointed out, is that so many people are conflating the religious ceremony of marriage with the legal and economic benefits that come with civil marriage. And so if you can decouple the two, I mean, because extending civil marriage licenses to same-sex couples does not mean that any religious denomination would be forced to either perform a ceremony or to recognize relationships in any way, shape, or form.
All right, I'm confused. Here's my confusion.
Okay.
You're using the term civil marriage.
Exactly.
Which sounds to me like a hybrid of civil union and marriage.
Well,
are you talking about...
It's actually not.
Okay.
I mean, because if you decouple the religious aspects of and the religious ceremony from marriage and just leave that aside for a moment, what marriage really is, it's a contract between two people. It's where there's a civil marriage license which is usually issued by the government, not by a religious denomination or a church, but by the government, which of course makes it a civil contract between two people who decide to spend their lives together. And through the granting of a civil marriage license comes over 1,000 federal benefits and hundreds of state-level benefits that are granted to married couples. Now, currently, because same-sex couples cannot marry in the United States,
most critically, health benefits, tax
benefits, immigration-related benefits, Social Security survivor benefits, issues relating to 401k rollover, inheritance. There's a whole range of issues, child custody, adoption, all of which are denied to same-sex couples. Now, in a few different states, there are some benefits, a few here and there that are granted to same-sex couples, but I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that, as we found out throughout our history, separate but equal is not really equal. So the whole idea of saying that, well, we don't want to give same-sex couples marriage, but we'll just give them domestic partnerships or civil unions, is really just very similar to what was happening with segregated schools. It's a way of saying that, well, we don't really want them to have access to what we have, so we'll create this parallel structure.
All right, let's be pragmatic for a moment. 62% of the American public, according to a CNN Time magazine poll, says they oppose gay marriage. At the same time, however, there's a split among the social conservatives that are proposing a federal constitutional amendment between those who would limit it to a ban on gay marriage and those who want to extend it to a ban on civil unions as well. And those who take the position that don't extend it to the civil unions are arguing that if we do that, that we're going to lose the whole thing. That apparently they believe, or at least part of that community believes, that the American public will oppose gay marriage. The name bothers them perhaps, but the underlying substance, they can't win on that issue. Doesn't it make sense to see the bottle half full?
Well, I guess there is, in terms of the overall fight for equality, there is no half full or half empty. There's either equality or there isn't. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people, both in the Republican and Democratic parties, are using families headed by gay and lesbian couples as political football in a very cynical way to try to either increase funds to their political parties or to increase the voter turnout among conservative and evangelical voters. So it's all about winning political points and not about advancing equality, particularly for gay and lesbian families.
But here in Maryland, actually, we've demonstrated we're more progressive because we are one of the few states that has an anti-discrimination law,
Exactly.
which we passed a number of years ago, which prohibits discrimination against gays and lesbians in housing and employment and public accommodation. So I think you're right. I think that we are going to eventually get what we're seeking, at least what we're seeking.
Right.
It is going to take time. But I think that language is important, and while, as you said, these polls have come out, I think, though, that I'd love to read those questions because I think most people are not making the distinctions that we're making here, and that is they're thinking of it in terms of religious terms and what that means to their religious beliefs, and as opposed to this being civil law dealing with marriage. Being able to get a marriage certificate, going to the courthouse, just like everybody else goes to the courthouse now, and that's a civil marriage without religious overtones or any clergy involved in the process.
What should the Democratic candidate for president say on this issue in 2004, realistically?
I'm going to say that the Democratic presidential candidate should say that he or she supports full equality for the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community.
I think the Democrats have to come out very strongly in support of gay marriage. I think that we have to distinguish ourselves, demonstrate that we are the party for equality, and that's the way to do it.
And to make a real principled stand of supporting equal protection for all families.
Thanks to Michael Crawford of the Human Rights Campaign and Maryland Senator Sharon Grosfeld for their views on how the issue of gay marriage and civil unions will play out legislatively in the region and in the 2004 political season. Polls may show a majority now opposes gay marriage, but most people won't vote on this issue alone, and November is still a long way off. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum.
The epigraph for this poem is, "They will mispronounce your name before they kill you," by Saul Williams. We think we are absolutely sure that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. We believe we know that Iraq is in possession of weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction. We have evidence that Saddam will use weapons of mass destruction. Saddam has already used weapons of mass destruction on his own people. There is strong evidence. There is sufficient evidence. There is scant evidence that Saddam has links to Al-Qaeda. Reports indicate that there is no clear link between Saddam and bin Laden. We must prevent Al-Qaeda and Saddam from using their weapons of mass destruction. Officials recommend that you buy duct tape and plastic sheeting to protect yourself from a likely, in the event of a terrorist attack. You can protect yourself from a terrorist attack with duct tape and plastic sheeting, bottled water, and batteries. Local supermarkets sold out of duct tape and plastic sheeting, bottled water, and batteries. Officials know of no specific threats to the region. Area schools are on terror alert. There is a high, medium to high, moderately high risk of a terrorist attack in the coming days. There is a high degree of certainty. There is a great degree of certainty. There is a medium to high degree of certainty, a reasonable degree of certainty. Today we are on high alert. Orange alert, yellow alert, blue alert. Be ready to move to code purple if necessary. Officials familiarize themselves with code purple procedures. To protect yourself from chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear attacks, cover your mouth and wash your hands. Cover your mouth. Cover your mouth and wash your hands. Al-Qaeda is thought to have chemical, biological, and radiological capabilities. Chemical, biological, and radiological capabilities. Defense officials wanted to avoid panicking people. Citizens are advised to stay calm, to stay in their houses, to proceed to the nearest underground shelter in the event of an emergency, in the event of an emergency. Dirty bombs, anthrax, and smallpox. Dirty bombs, anthrax, and smallpox. It was announced that sales for duct tape, bottled water, batteries, and plastic sheeting have spiked in recent days.
Hi, and welcome to a second look at the coffee house. Let's be upfront about something. None of us expect the full truth all the time from our presidents. We understand that they might even have good reasons to be evasive, reasons of national security. But it is the job of the press to tell us when a bunch of misstatements that might be justifiable or harmless turn into a pattern of self-serving deceptions that undermine public trust. During the Bush administration, most journalists have been very reluctant to call the president a liar, but not David Kohn. At the height of the president's popularity, David began writing a book he boldly titled The Lies of George W. Bush. This book has now been published, and David is here to explain why he believes this president is guilty of going over the line far too many times. Welcome back to the coffee house, David.
Thanks for having me, Howard.
Let me start with your counterparts, the people who haven't written this book.
Sure.
We have a president elected under dubious circumstances, hardly a clear mandate, and yet 3 years, almost, well into his third year, he is still enjoying what amounts to a honeymoon. How do you explain that?
Well, there are a couple of different ways of getting at the dynamic of the press and its handling of its job vis-a-vis this president. And I think there's always a difficult relationship that gets played out between the press. And I actually get into this at length in the end of the book.
That's
and the
right.
conclusion,
So
because
starting with the end of your book.
So the conclusion is titled, "How's he gotten away with it so far?" And a good part of the answer, it's not the entire answer, but a good part of the answer is the press coverage. And if you look at sort of two different phases, during the campaign phase, when I argue in the book, or I think I prove in the book, that George Bush was being as dishonest as Al Gore was, yet Al Gore was getting all the flack for being the dishonest candidate running, the serial fibber. Most campaigns develop narratives, plot lines, and the plot line of the 2000 campaign for large segments of the press was, is Al Gore a serial fibber, And is George Bush bright enough to be president?
Right.
So
likable, but not maybe not necessarily a sharp bulb.
Sure. So stories that fell into those parameters got a lot of attention. Anytime you could find, Gore saying something that could be construed or misconstrued as false, they made a big deal out of it. Anytime George Bush looked like a boo because of his syntax problems and otherwise, or couldn't name foreign leaders of state, he got slammed for that. But what happened is, a good example was on the first debate. Al Gore said during the debate, I don't even know why he was talking about it, but he said at some point in time that he had gone to Texas with the head of FEMA to view the wildfires down there. Well, it turns out, no, he went with a deputy head of FEMA. But yet the next day the coverage was, even that night the coverage was, there he goes again, not telling the truth. Well, George Bush at one point was asked why he wouldn't support a campaign finance reform bill, and he pointed a finger at Al Gore and said, that man has outspent me. No, at that point in the campaign, Gore had spent $60 million and George W. Bush had spent $120 million. So not only was he was wrong by a 2-to-1 margin. So I think the press just decided not to make a big deal of that, but they made a big deal of the FEMA thing. But then once you get to the White House, you have sort of different dynamics at work.
Well, what I'm wondering is there, so this pattern starts back then, is there a point when Bush does cross the line, at least in your mind? I mean, you're writing this book for fame and fortune, we understand, but is there a journalistic
Well, I think there are a lot. I think there are a lot of things during the campaign in which he didn't tell the truth about himself, that his missing year of service in the Air National Guard. He talked about his record in Texas as being glorious. He made a lot of false statements about that. A simple example is at one point he said SAT scores in Texas had gone up. He said this in a Republican debate under his governorship. Actually, SAT scores had dropped by 3 points while the national average had gone up by 9 points. So, and I didn't see anybody, I don't recall any press stories sort of going, aha, look at that. He's misleading about his own education record. So there was sort of I don't think there was a mindset in terms of the press to try to find these things out and to give him great scrutiny. And they also, if the question is whether he's bright enough or not, if that's sort of the overall,
he's not bright enough to pull off a big charade.
You don't worry so much about whether he's getting it right or not, the way you would for Al Gore, who considers himself Mr. Brainiac. Right. Now, but once you get to the White House, there's sort of a different dynamic. I think that the White House press corps and the president, there's always sort of this ongoing defining of the relationship between the two and establishing borders. I mean, it often happens with any beat reporting, as you would know, from covering City Hall or police department. The relationship between the reporter and the subject of the reporter can be dicey because you often depend on your target for access. You want to get the interviews with the high administration officials. You want to get called on at White House press conferences. This White House in particular has been very vindictive against the few reporters who have, given them hard questions. They call up their editors. They complain a lot. A lot of reporters don't want that.
Is he vindictive toward reporters?
Tremendously so. Dana Milbank, the Washington Post White House correspondent, one or two, wrote a piece in October 2002 in which he said that sometimes the president exaggerates, misleads, doesn't get his facts right, all the things that people said of Gore. He didn't use the word lie, but he more or less implied that. And the day that the story came out, the morning it came out, a White House senior aide called The Note, which is a daily political tip sheet put out by ABC News. You can get it at their website. And it's read by a lot of people in town. And they just started dumping, this person started dumping on Dana Milbank. And this is a reporter who doesn't get his facts straight. And it's easy to sort of brush that off, but you also worry as a reporter in the White House about being cut off and not getting the calls returned and so on. And what I discovered too, so I think there's a certain natural reluctance to go too far. You also, it's like the Supreme Court following the public opinion polls. If the president's popular, you don't want to seem out of sync with the public too much. Ben Bradley, the former executive editor of the Washington Post, said the hardest thing for a reporter to do is to say the president lied about something. There are real natural.
And so what
roadblocks
made you
But
bold enough to do that?
But there's one, just to
Okay.
finish that
So
point,
there's-
there's
okay.
one other thing that goes on that I think is quite fascinating, and that is a lot of the things that I talk about in my book. And my book, I cover untrue statements or lies or false assertions on the war in Iraq, tax cuts, Social Security, global warming, energy policy, missile defense, stem cell research, a host of issues. And a lot of that stuff is hidden in plain sight. By that I mean that reporters working for the major newspapers, the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, feel duty-bound to report what the president says. Today the president said that my tax cut plan will produce 400,000 jobs and da-da-da-da. And they feel, okay, they got to transcribe it and tell the public what he said. 7, 8 paragraphs into the story, they might then say, the report that the White House cited as the basis for its jobs claim also said that over a 3-year period, there will be a job loss. And they put, they put in the contrary information or the information that disproves what the president's saying low down in the story, and it doesn't become part of the story itself. Before the war in Iraq, you might recall a few times the president got out there and linked Saddam Hussein to Al-Qaeda. At one point he said Saddam Hussein is dealing with Al-Qaeda. And then in the same story, 7, 8 paragraphs into it, you'd have administration officials and intelligence officials quoted saying there's no intelligence to confirm or to substantiate what the president said.
So you basically took the stories and turned them on
Well,
their
what
heads.
you could easily do in that circumstance, as a reporter is in the lead paragraph say, today the president claimed that Saddam Hussein was in league with Al-Qaeda, even though intelligence officials say there's no evidence to prove that.
Right.
I mean, but they don't do that. They feel, I think, a reluctance to be accusatory in that fashion. And the day before we went to war, the Washington Post did a story. I can almost cite the lead from memory, in which they said, as the president guides the country to the war, he's doing so on the basis of a number of assertions that have been disputed and in some cases proven wrong by the UN, by other nations, and even by his own intelligence agencies. Now, the Washington Post did that. They put it on page A13. The headline was, Bush clings to dubious allegations. Now, my question is, if you really believe, and it wasn't an op-ed piece. This was a piece by a White House reporter for the Post who I presume, have faith in. Now, if you really believe that the president is going to war on the basis of dubious allegations, why is that not front page material? I don't know.
Well, that's a good point.
I give the Post credit because no one else did a story like that, but still.
So the essence of what you're saying here is that Bush lied about his biography. Probably a lot of candidates lie about their biography or exaggerate. Clinton lied about his personal life. But now we're in a serious stage, we're at war, and we have the same pattern, Bush lying and exaggerating about serious matters.
Well, a lot of people ask me, is he a bigger liar than Bill Clinton, a different liar, quicker, slower liar? All those things. I've gotten these questions since the book came out.
Well, is he?
Well, I think he's distinctive in the sense that, when he announced he was running for office in 2000, he said that he was running to restore honesty and integrity to the Oval Office. Those are his words, restore. So he made honesty an issue, and he basically said, I'm not going to be the usual politician. So I think he could be judged according to his own words. I think, post 9/11, we live in an age where the need for credibility from the President of the United States is paramount. He does have to rally the country and rally the world in order to fight the challenge that is out there.
Well, we have a world and a country thinking that we went to war for dubious reasons.
Right, and that's not good in case the time comes when he has to rally the country and the world again for maybe legitimate reasons. But also I think that if you look at the central pillars of his presidency, which are the supersized tax cuts tilted towards the rich and the war in Iraq, it's undeniable that these are bold policy moves, whether you like them or not, and that they have dramatic consequences for the United States and for the world. And I argue in the book, I'll say the title again, The Lies of George W. Bush. I argue in the book
that he wanted these policies and he would say anything to get them, basically.
For both of these policies, they were greased to the hilt with lies, when you could have made honest arguments for them.
Good. That is going to be the end of it.
Let me just say, bushlies.com is the website to talk about the book.
Great, thank you. Thanks to David Cohen for giving us the lowdown on his book, The Lies of George W. Bush. And the lowdown is exactly what it is. This book is a powerful indictment of a presidency that seems to be sinking to a new depth. If former presidents have been skillful at hiding or misstating the truth, this president seems intent on doing them one better. I'm Howard Cohn, and this has been A Second Look.
The roof of that has twin funnels. Maybe it's a ship, its passengers drinking tea while the crew try to get the engine started. I watch the grey sky fold the street to its bosom. The lights come on in the cabins. Rain lashes the patio deck, and seagulls flee the rigging of the telephone wires. I dream of the copper ports, flying fishes in warm, clear seas, of a bow pointing south and the sun beckoning wantonly. And I saw a line across, hoping they'll take me on board. But this ship is going nowhere. My line becomes entangled with the end of the day. The sea returns to grass. The funnels become chimneys. On the radio, the shipping forecast ends.
When I'm in an airplane, I never see people on the ground. As if I were in an episode of Twilight Zone where Rod Serling asks you the existential question, are there other people when you're nowhere near them, when you can't see them? No matter how close to the ground, when the plane is taking off or landing, I don't see people walking around or out of buildings. Sure, I see cars driving along roads, but that's like seeing one of those big-scale model displays at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. Lots of activity, but no moving people. But when I'm on the ground and I look up, I see plenty of airplanes flying like snails on helium, too far away to touch or hear. I wonder if anyone on the plane can see me. If when I look up at them, can someone looking down get a glimpse of me? You know, does it require simultaneous acknowledgement for people to really see each other as they are? I wonder if that's why some people don't see each other, why some people know nothing about other people and their cultures. Does it require a glance, a similar passing interest for people to notice one another? I mean, I know a lot about other people's cultures, but they seem so disinterested in mine. I feel as if they don't really care. Hold up, I know they don't. Or no one's taught them to care. I watched this game show where all these smart people got stuck on 3 questions most black people know like their phone number. Lady Day's real name, the city where the 55 bus boycott took place, and the name of BB's guitar. You know those, right? I know it's not critical information to get anyone through the day except me, but one of these pieces was critical to my existence on the planet, and I will not accept that everyone in America need know about Montgomery and claim themselves smart. I expect that people will look like ants when I'm in an airplane, little, black, hurrying about, my having no knowledge of what they do during the day, whether they sleep at night. Do they get mad when I block their way with a pencil? Do they get scared when my shadow cools the ground they're walking on? Does it hurt when I step on them? I suppose that might be what's going on with a lot of other people who might as well be in airplanes when they're on the ground, walking around, oblivious to anyone else's existence, or just as uncaring about people, their struggles, triumphs, and pains, as they are about ants. Maybe we should all just come back to Earth.
Hello, Welcome to Writer's Block at the Coffee House. Thanks for joining us. With us today is a children's book author, illustrator, and producer whose work explores the history and traditions of the Caribbean, Latin America, and his native country, Puerto Rico. His works include On This Beautiful Island, a picture book which he adapted from his original film, Taino, Guanin's Story. Both the book and film are inspired by the ancient culture of the Taino, the indigenous people of Puerto Rico. Edwin Fontanes is also the author and producer of other books and films, most recently Heart of the Imaginero, Little Wood Carver. Edwin, welcome to the Coffee House.
Thank you for having me. Nice to see you, Noemi.
And likewise. Throughout all of your stories, Edwin, you focus on the Taino, the indigenous culture of Puerto Rico and its people, on traditions, spirituality, the natural world. Can you talk about why that is?
Basically, I'm just writing the stories that I wanted to read or to be read when I was a kid, because I look around nowadays and I don't envy the duty of a parent nowadays and being subjected to the material that is passed as entertainment. So basically, at heart, I'm 5.
That's wonderful.
So I'm writing stories for myself, and of course, I also have spent most of my adult life in the States, and I also live firsthand what is it to be like an immigrant, basically. So when I see parents also that are trying to look for that link to their culture, so I think it's a wonderful opportunity for me to explore those themes. And it's also a wonderful method for myself to educate myself once again and get reacquainted with those themes. So that's what I'm so focused in continuing to bring forth the beautiful folklore and culture of Puerto Rico.
Now, do you write in English or Spanish?
I write in English, basically. And for some reason and a lot of difficulty, then I try to translate to Spanish, but basically I do write in English.
Great, and I want to know what makes a person want to be a children's book writer? Why do you write for children, and what age groups specifically do you write for?
Well, you know something, I've been an artist all my life, and I first didn't set out to be an author or a writer. It's just as an artist, you grow and you come into experiences, and your life evolves as time passes by. And it's interesting because people try to create a classification for you. Like, for instance, are you a painter? Are you a writer? Are you a designer? And it's very difficult, but I have to say yes to all of them, because it's not a specific process. It just evolves. Sometimes I wake up and hit by a lightning rod, and it's like, okay, today I'm going to do a painting about my cat. And sometimes a beautiful word, a beautiful day outside, it's just inspiration enough to create a new story.
How is that different, writing for children, than it is writing for adults?
Well, that's a great question, and a very difficult one also, because deceivingly, children's stories are not that simple, know. And I think for a good writer, you have to put yourself in a child's shoes. And for me, I must confess, it's still a very arduous process, that it takes a lot of effort and a lot of research. And but as painful as the process sometimes might be, the end results are just wonderful, and fulfilling. So that's what I like about. That's what I live for as an author.
I think what makes you interesting, also very interesting as a children's book author, is the fact that you don't just do the writing, you also do the illustrations. And a lot of children's books I've come across for a person that's either, it's a split up job.
That's correct.
Not always, but most of the time. What came first for you, the painting or the writing, and how did you come to blend the two?
Well, that is a great question. And if I can answer it correctly, I can tell you the story of my life. But you know something, writing, for me, the most wonderful part of it is the research. And sometimes I think that my primary education was so inadequate that probably now I'm trying to catch up. So for me, the most wonderful part of starting any project is the research. I think I am so proud of being an American, and I'm so proud of the Library of Congress because besides being a gorgeous building, I just love what it symbolizes, and I just love to sit there and do my research. And I wasn't lying before when I said the process can be very painful because it's almost like having a child, you know. I can show you the stretch marks also.
But, so does it happen simultaneously for you? I mean, was there a point in your life where you started painting or just started writing, or you decided, okay, I'm going to write children's book stories, children's books, and the painting and the writing came together at the same time?
Well, it's just everything falls into place. The reason that I started to interested in writing for children was precisely a few years back, through the help of a friend, Paquita Vivo, I started to offer a series of workshops in public schools. And sadly enough, I could sense that there was a segment of the classroom and some kind of the background of the students that wasn't being addressed. But I remember in particular one occasion I started to offer a workshop about the Vejigantes, which is a folkloric character from Puerto Rico. So I started to do my introduction, and the moment that I mentioned the name of the workshop, I see this little kid in the back end of the room, and his face lit up because it was something that he was familiar with. It was something that was...
And it was able to touch him.
Exactly.
He related to it.
And, you know, the expression on that child's face, it was just incredible. And for some reason, it inspired me to start writing and producing for children. And also with my nature of... I think I'm a very impatient person. So I wasn't willing to wait and for a publishing house to give me the green light. This is something that I took charge completely.
But you've also delved into filmmaking, and I want
That's
to make
correct.
sure we leave time to talk about that. Very, very quickly, how did you come into filmmaking?
Well, almost by accident, because, for instance, for my newest story, Heart of the Imaginero, I had envisioned a very simple life. Simple life. A very simple story. And, but the thing is, I wanted to give it some meaning, put some personal touch into it. What I got as a result was that I was putting it was almost a autobiography, you know. Just because of that, the process started to get more complicated, and I started to add layers to the story. And once that I, for instance, invested 2 years working on the illustrations, and I said, you know, it would be great if I also incorporate a certain degree of movement, of life into this story.
And I just want to interrupt you and say very quickly that I have an example to show our audience. In the scene from Imaginero, Eduardito is carving his first picture. His first carving. Let's take a look.
Great.
This looks awful. This is not supposed to look like this, he protested, abandoning the rough piece of wood in frustration. Only practice will make you a skillful santero. Being a woodcarver is more than knowing how to shape the wood, Doña Rosa advised reassuringly. Help me clean up a little bit while I tell you a story. It was Christmas time, a very long time ago, when I was just a little girl. I was at my best friend Remedios' house. I was surprised their nativity scene under the tree seemed rather sparse. I felt sorry for Remedios, so I decided to make a carving as my special gift to her. I asked my father if he could teach me. He was a santero too, and I had watched him at work many times. Being an imaginero is a man's job, Rosita, he told me. To be a woodcarver, your spirit must be as strong as your hands.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thanks to the multi-talented Edwin Fontanes for joining us in the Coffee House. We'll be on the lookout for his next book and film. I'm Naomi Ayala, and this has been Writer's Block.
You are sponsored in part by the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress, and this is your first tour of America.
Добро пожаловать, Дмитрий, добро пожаловать в Светилин. Вы приглашены фольклорным центром библиотеки Конгресса, и это ваш первый визит в Америку.
Да, и мы необычайно счастливы продемонстрировать свое искусство жителям вашей страны.
Yes, we are delighted to deliver our art to your citizens.
Well, this is truly an honor for us as well. Tell me, what was that last song about?
Спасибо. Скажите, пожалуйста, о чем была эта песня?
Это песнопение было написано по мотивам библейского повествования.
It is about a Bible story.
О том, как евреи вышли из Египта, ведомые Моисеем.
About the Jews led by Moses from the Egypt land.
Это плач по безвозвратно утраченной родине.
It is a wailing over the native land lost forever.
Now, you collect material from many sources. How do you collect songs? Where do you find them? In small villages, big cities?
Где вы берете материал? Из каких, собственно, мест?
Сейчас в России возрождается интерес к русской фольклорной духовной музыке.
We have a great interest in Russia, a great interest in folk music.
И мы имеем возможность плотного контакта с исследователями в этой области.
We have the opportunity to communicate with scientists who are specialists in this sphere.
Плюс интуиция и наше желание возродить эту традицию.
And the artistic intuition and our wish to make this tradition live.
Now, in your biographical notes, I saw that some of your music is obviously Christian, and some is also from pagan sources. Did these coexist essentially, and at what time in history did these coexist?
Из ваших источников я прочитал, что часть музыки имеет христианское основание, но часть также и языческое. Каким образом это сочетается?
Скорее здесь языческое нужно заменить на фольклорное.
Not pagan, but folk.
Folk.
Именно на стыке двух традиций церковных, богослужебных и фольклорных
These both two traditions are interconnected.
Мы изнимаемся свободным нашим творчеством.
And our creation is free from those traditions, but it makes them live both of them.
Чем, собственно, и занимались 100 лет назад странствующие музыканты.
Just like strong singers and musicians did many years ago.
Right. So not only do you preserve, but you interpret as well.
Вы не только сохраняете, но вы также и интерпретируете.
Да, и это именно так.
Yes,
Нам мало просто воспроизводить материалы, которые дошли до наших дней.
It is too little for us just to preserve.
Great. Now, you'll take us out with one more song. Tell me what that song is about, the last one that you're going to do.
О чем будет последняя песня, которую вы споете?
Последняя песня, я думаю, будет посвящена грядущему празднику Рождества Христова.
It will be dedicated to the coming Christmas.
Good, because Christmas is coming at any time, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Народи Thank you.